In a world where wealth often defines one's place, there was a woman with nothing but a heart full of ambition, a mind brimming with ideas, and a vision that could alter the course of history. She was the wife of a poor man, yet she stood poised to change the world in ways no one expected. Her journey was not one of riches but of courage, strength, and a burning desire to break free from the shackles of poverty. The story of the poor man's wife who transformed her world is one of resilience, innovation, and the power of a single vision. In a small, modest village nestled between rolling hills, lived a woman whose name would soon be known far and wide. Her life, although simple, was not devoid of meaning. Her husband, a hard-working man, labored each day in the fields, and their home was modest, often just enough to get by. Despite their humble beginnings, there was something extraordinary about the woman, the kind of extraordinary that comes not from wealth or grandeur, but from the power of a dream. She had always believed that the key to transforming a life lay in knowledge. Growing up, she was often told that women like her, from families with limited means, didn't have much to offer the world. But she knew differently. She saw potential where others saw poverty. Every morning, as she looked out over the quiet fields, she would wonder how the world could change if only the people around her had more access to the things they needed to thrive. They could all do so much more, but they were shackled by their lack of resources, their inability to access education, and the social structures that kept them in place. It was during those long days of contemplation that the idea began to take shape. She didn't need money or a title to make a difference. What the people needed was opportunity. Education, resources, and the right support systems could break the chains that bound them to lives of poverty. And with that realization, her mission became clear. She was determined to be the one to provide those opportunities, even if it meant starting from the ground up. At first, the task seemed impossible. She wasn't well known, and her family was poor, just like so many others in the village. But she was undeterred. Every day, as her husband worked in the fields, she thought about how she could make her vision a reality. There were so many people who wanted more, but had no idea how to achieve it. She had been given the gift of a strong mind and an insatiable desire to learn, and she was ready to use these qualities to help others. She began by organizing small meetings within her village, bringing people together to discuss ideas, share skills, and learn from one another. It wasn't much at first, just a handful of people who gathered around to talk about their struggles. But with each meeting, something incredible happened. Hope began to grow. People began to realize that they weren't alone in their hardships, and together, they could find solutions. Her mission expanded. She started teaching people basic skills that would help them build a better future. She taught the children to read, even though the nearest school was miles away. She shared lessons in sewing, agriculture, and trades that could help the people become more self-sufficient. But it wasn't just about teaching skills, it was about teaching confidence. She empowered them to believe that change was not only possible, but within their reach. She knew that change was never easy. She had witnessed the ways in which poverty stripped people of their self-worth, how it kept them from dreaming, and how it made them feel insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But she also knew that the key to breaking free from these chains lay in one simple truth. When you give people the tools to shape their own destinies, they can change the world. And that's exactly what she intended to do. Her work didn't stop with the people in her immediate village. As more and more people came to her for help, she began to realize the far-reaching potential of her mission. What started as a small initiative to teach local children to read and write had quickly evolved into something much larger. She was now helping families become more self-sufficient, sharing the knowledge they needed to prosper, and helping them to see that they were not defined by the circumstances they were born into. She was building a movement, one person at a time, one lesson at a time. Her methods were simple: empower individuals with the knowledge and tools they needed to improve their own lives. It didn't require massive resources or grand gestures, just a commitment to teaching, to sharing, and to lifting people up. She didn't need a fortune to make a difference. All she needed was a vision and the will to act on it. The seeds she planted began to grow. People who had once felt trapped in their circumstances now believed they could have better lives. They started small businesses, grew their own food, and found ways to support themselves and their families. The women, who had once been considered nothing more than caretakers, began to see themselves as leaders, capable of making decisions that would affect not only their families but their entire community. As the movement grew, so did the ripple effects. Neighbors began helping neighbors, friends began supporting one another, and the entire village started to see the potential within themselves. She had sparked a fire, and it was spreading faster than she had ever imagined. Word of her efforts reached other villages, and soon people from outside the region came to learn from her. What began as a humble attempt to bring change to a small community had turned into a transformative force that could not be stopped. Through it all, her belief never wavered. She had been told so many times that a woman like her, born into poverty, couldn't change anything. But she had proven them all wrong. She had not only changed her own life but the lives of everyone around her. The journey of a poor man's wife who transformed the world had just begun. And as long as she had breath in her lungs and fire in her heart, there was no limit to the change she could bring. Her journey was far from over. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, and that the challenges would only grow as her movement expanded. But she had something far more powerful than wealth. She had a vision, and the unwavering determination to see it through. And with that vision, there was nothing she couldn't achieve. As the small meetings grew larger, the ripple effect began to spread. What once seemed like a modest gathering of hopeful villagers soon became the catalyst for a movement that would forever alter the course of their community. The poor man's wife, with her quiet strength and unwavering belief in the power of knowledge, had unknowingly begun the most significant transformation her village had ever seen. She continued to build on her success, expanding her reach to the neighboring areas. Her simple yet profound idea, teaching others how to thrive through self-sufficiency, was rapidly taking root. She wasn't just showing the villagers how to read, but how to see themselves as capable, empowered individuals. The farmers began cultivating new crops they had never thought to grow, based on the agricultural techniques she shared. The women learned to sew, turning discarded materials into clothes that were sold to others. The children, once illiterate and full of uncertainty about their future, began to excel in their studies, filling their hearts with the hope that they, too, could be someone important. As more villagers took part in her workshops, the idea of self-sufficiency became more than just a survival tactic, it became a source of pride. The village was no longer a place where people merely existed. They were learning, thriving, and progressing in ways they had never believed possible. Yet, this was only the beginning. The poor man's wife recognized that the challenges ahead would not be easily overcome. There was much to be done, but she was not one to shy away from obstacles. The impact of her teachings extended beyond practical skills and self-sufficiency. She also began to foster a sense of community that hadn't existed before. When people came together with a shared purpose, magic happened. No longer did the villagers see themselves as isolated individuals simply trying to survive. Instead, they saw themselves as part of a collective effort to change their reality. Her influence began to shape the culture of the village, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, giving everyone a renewed sense of hope and possibility. But this transformation didn't come without resistance. There were those who were skeptical of her methods, who thought that her dreams were too grand for such a small and impoverished community. They saw her as just a woman, a wife, who had no place making such significant decisions. Some tried to derail her efforts, spreading rumors and attempting to convince others that her vision was too unrealistic, too ambitious. But she remained unwavering. She had been doubted her whole life, and this was no different. She wasn't about to let the opinions of a few people define her or stop her progress. Her husband, although a humble and hard-working man, was initially confused by his wife's rising influence. He was proud of her, but he struggled to understand how her ideas could grow beyond their small community. Over time, however, he began to see the changes in the people around him. He saw the hope in their eyes and the determination in their steps. The village was coming alive in a way that was impossible to ignore. He realized that his wife's vision wasn't just some fleeting dream, it was a reality that was changing everything for the better. He became her greatest supporter, assisting with the logistics of gathering resources and expanding her reach even further. Word of the transformation was spreading beyond their small village. Neighbors, once skeptical, were now coming to her asking for help. Villages further away sent messengers seeking her advice. She became known not just for her wisdom, but for her unwavering belief in the power of education. She taught them the fundamental principle that knowledge was the true source of power, and that it was accessible to everyone, regardless of their status, wealth, or background. Her efforts started to attract attention from local leaders and philanthropists. Some saw the potential to invest in her cause, while others feared that she was disrupting the established order. They were concerned that empowering the poor would lead to greater social unrest. Yet the woman remained steadfast in her belief that the power of knowledge could uplift an entire community without tearing down the established structures. The old ways of thinking, based on hierarchy and class divisions, were crumbling in the face of a more inclusive, knowledge-driven approach. As time went on, the transformation of her village became a symbol for the larger region. People were taking notice. The poor man's wife had not only given the villagers the tools they needed to improve their lives, she had taught them how to envision a future where they could thrive. The social barriers that had once trapped them in a cycle of poverty were slowly being dismantled, one step at a time. With the expansion of her work came the need for additional support and infrastructure. Her movement was gaining momentum, and she found herself in a position where she could help even more people. As she helped others build businesses, create organizations, and become self-sustaining, she noticed that the village no longer felt like the isolated, impoverished place it had once been. It had blossomed into a beacon of hope and possibility for surrounding communities. However, the true test came when outside forces began to see the potential in the people of the village. Other regions sought to learn from the woman's methods, and many asked her to bring her teachings to their own villages. She had become a symbol of change, not just in her own community but for the wider world. As word of her success spread, she realized that her work was no longer limited to her village. It had become a movement, a revolution of sorts, a movement that was reshaping not only the lives of individuals but also the very fabric of society. The small, humble village had turned into a thriving center of knowledge and empowerment. Her dream of giving people the tools to change their lives had blossomed into something far greater than she had ever anticipated. It was no longer just about surviving, it was about thriving, building, and creating something meaningful. This woman, the poor man's wife, had done the impossible. With determination, faith in herself, and a commitment to her community, she had proven that even the humblest of people could change the world. Her story was one of transformation, not just for herself, but for everyone she touched. And as her movement continued to grow, it was clear that the world would never be the same again. She had changed not just the lives of the people around her, but had left an indelible mark on the course of history. As the movement continued to grow, the woman began to face new challenges that tested not only her resilience but also her vision. The progress had been remarkable, but there were still many obstacles ahead. With success came the complexities of managing the growing demands of the villagers who looked to her for guidance, support, and inspiration. She had given them hope, but now she needed to ensure that they could sustain it. This was a moment of truth, and she understood that how she handled this phase would determine whether the village's transformation could endure in the long term. One of the first obstacles was the growing divide between the newcomers to her teachings and those who had been with her from the start. Some of the original villagers feared that their way of life was being lost in the face of rapid change. They were accustomed to traditional roles and were hesitant about the new skills and ideas being introduced. The woman knew that progress could be threatening to those who weren't ready to embrace it, so she worked tirelessly to reassure them. She held meetings with the older generation, explaining how these changes were not meant to erase their traditions but to complement them. She encouraged them to take pride in the progress, showing them how much they had gained from these new methods without losing sight of their roots. Her efforts were not always successful, but she never gave up. She listened to their concerns, provided the necessary resources to help them adjust, and gradually, over time, their resistance softened. She understood that change had to be embraced slowly and with understanding. She never pushed too hard but gently guided her community toward a future where everyone could find their place, regardless of age or experience. But while she was dealing with internal struggles, external forces were also beginning to take notice. The village had become a symbol of hope, and her methods were spreading to other regions. The woman was invited to speak at regional gatherings, conferences, and even some political arenas where she shared her story of empowerment through knowledge. She was becoming a voice for the voiceless, the oppressed, and the marginalized. The recognition she received was overwhelming, but it brought with it a new set of challenges. Some of the political leaders who invited her had their own agendas. They saw her success as an opportunity to further their personal interests and gain favor with the people. They offered her financial support and resources, but with strings attached. They wanted her to steer her message in directions that would benefit their political careers. The woman was torn. She could sense the ulterior motives beneath their offers of assistance. While some of the leaders genuinely wanted to support the village and its transformation, others saw her as a tool to further their own power. It was a complicated situation, and she knew that accepting too much help from these figures could compromise the integrity of her movement. She made the difficult decision to decline any offers that came with strings attached. The principles she had established, of community, independence, and self-sufficiency, were non-negotiable. She couldn't risk allowing her mission to be diluted by political influence. She knew that the movement's strength lay in its grassroots nature, its focus on empowering individuals rather than relying on external sources of power. She could not allow herself to become a pawn in someone else's game. Her dedication to the village's future was far stronger than any political promises. But as her influence continued to grow, so did the expectations placed upon her. She felt the pressure weighing heavily on her shoulders. There were times when she questioned whether she had the strength to continue. The demands from outside sources and the ever-growing expectations from the village began to take their toll. Her own family, her husband and children, also began to feel the strain. She had spent so much time devoted to her cause that she struggled to balance her responsibilities as a wife and mother with her leadership role in the movement. Her husband, who had supported her every step of the way, began to feel neglected. The long hours she spent working with the villagers and traveling for speaking engagements left little time for him. Their children, though proud of their mother, often missed her attention. The strain on her family life caused her to pause and reflect. She had become so immersed in her mission that she had neglected the people who mattered most to her. In this period of reflection, she realized that in order for her to continue with her work, she needed to find a balance. She had to be there for her family while also being there for the community. The work she was doing was important, but her family was the foundation upon which her strength rested. She started delegating more tasks, empowering others to step up and take on leadership roles within the village. She trusted that the people she had mentored were ready to take on greater responsibility. Slowly, she began to carve out more time for her loved ones, understanding that a strong community leader needed to have a strong home life. Her commitment to self-improvement didn't stop at her family life. She also recognized the importance of continuously learning and growing. She began seeking out new knowledge, attending workshops, and connecting with other social entrepreneurs who could offer new insights. She had always believed in the power of education, and now, more than ever, she knew that in order to continue leading her village, she needed to evolve alongside it. As the village flourished, her mission expanded even further. Her work had gained attention not just regionally, but internationally. International organizations and NGOs began reaching out, offering to support her cause. They recognized the power of her movement and wanted to help spread it across the globe. Though she had learned to be cautious in accepting support, she realized that these organizations shared her values and could help amplify her message. She worked closely with them, ensuring that their contributions were in line with the values of independence and empowerment she had worked so hard to cultivate. Over time, the village transformed into a beacon of hope. What had once been a small community struggling to survive was now a thriving example of how education, empowerment, and collective effort could change the world. The woman's work had changed not only her own life but the lives of countless others. And as her influence spread, she knew that the movement she had started would continue to grow, touching lives far beyond the village where it all began. Her story became a legend, a story of a woman who, through sheer determination and vision, changed not just a village, but the course of history. She had started with nothing but a dream and a belief in the power of knowledge. She had faced countless obstacles and doubts, but through it all, she had remained true to her mission. Her legacy would live on for generations to come, a testament to the transformative power of education and the strength of a single individual's vision. The weight of her journey had been immense, but she had learned that true leadership required personal sacrifices. As the movement grew, so did her understanding of the deeper impact she was having on the world. Her ability to inspire wasn't simply about motivating people to act, it was about instilling in them a belief that they could make a difference. She had taken something as simple as the pursuit of knowledge and turned it into a force of change, and this transformation had ripple effects far beyond the village. Yet as her influence spread, she couldn't ignore the more profound personal struggles that remained. The greater the success, the more divided her time became. The balance she had worked so hard to find between family and her work began to falter again. The calls for her attention grew louder, and her ability to meet the demands of both her family and her community was increasingly strained. This conflict between personal and public duty had led her to a crossroads. She had always known that leadership came with its own sacrifices, but now, with her children growing older and more independent, she found herself at a new phase of life where both her family and her community required more of her in different ways. It was during this turbulent time that a breakthrough came from a source she hadn't expected: her children. Having grown up in the heart of the movement, they had watched her juggle the world's expectations, and they had seen the toll it took on her. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, her son spoke up. "You've always told us how important it is to empower others, Mom," he said. "Well, now we're old enough to take on some of the responsibility. We can help you. You don't have to carry the weight alone anymore." Her daughter echoed his sentiments, and for the first time in a long while, the woman felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her children were ready to step up and support her. They weren't just ready to take on the tasks at home, but also to take on leadership roles within the village. They had inherited the same values of empowerment and independence that she had worked so hard to instill. It was in that moment that she realized the most important legacy she could leave behind wasn't just the transformation of the village, but the empowerment of future generations, her own children. With renewed purpose, she handed over certain responsibilities to her children, trusting them to lead and guide the villagers as she had. This act of letting go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She had always taught others to trust in themselves and their abilities, and now it was her turn to do the same. Her children had the vision, the passion, and the drive to continue the work she had started, and it was time for them to build on that foundation. As they assumed leadership roles, her presence in the community changed. She became more of a guide than a leader, offering wisdom and perspective when needed, but no longer the figurehead of the movement. She watched proudly as her children flourished, each taking on different aspects of the work. Her son focused on education, while her daughter became a leading voice in women's rights and empowerment. Together, they helped expand the movement, bringing in new ideas while staying grounded in the values that had originally fueled their mother's vision. With her children now leading, the woman had the opportunity to reflect on everything she had accomplished and what lay ahead. She spent more time traveling, speaking at international conferences, sharing her story of empowerment and education. She had become an internationally recognized figure, but despite the accolades, she remained humble, knowing that the true impact of her work was seen not in the awards she received, but in the lasting changes she had created in the lives of others. One such experience came when she was invited to speak at a global summit on women's rights. There, she shared the story of the village's transformation and how education had been the key to unlocking the potential of an entire community. Her message resonated deeply with people from all walks of life: leaders, activists, and educators alike. It wasn't just a story of individual success, it was a story about the power of collective effort. The movement had grown far beyond its humble beginnings, and she was proud of what it had become. In her later years, the woman came to understand that the key to true change wasn't just about providing people with the tools they needed to succeed, but about fostering a sense of hope and agency within them. She had ignited a fire that would burn long after she was gone, not because of her own leadership, but because of the collective will of those who had believed in the cause. And through her children, the next generation carried the torch forward. As the years passed, the village continued to thrive, now a symbol of empowerment and resilience. What had once been a struggling community was now a beacon of hope, with schools, health programs, and sustainable agriculture at the heart of its success. The people were no longer reliant on outside help, and the village had become a model for other regions seeking to follow in its footsteps. The woman's story had come full circle. From a young woman with a dream to an elderly matriarch watching her children and community flourish, she had built something that was far greater than herself. The legacy of her movement would live on through the lives of those she had empowered and the ripple effect it had created around the world. She knew that the work would never truly be done. It was a continuous cycle of growth and transformation, but she was at peace, knowing that she had ignited a spark that would never be extinguished. Her legacy wasn't defined by the challenges she had faced or the obstacles she had overcome. It was defined by the lives she had touched, the barriers she had broken, and the unshakable belief that one person, no matter how humble their beginnings, could indeed change the world.